So what's going on, Civics class? You already know it, it's your main man Blaine Smith back at it again with another video. So you guys are not going to believe what I have in store for today's video. Today I'm going to unveil my very own country and government that I single-handedly crafted without any help of outside sources or anything. Just from yours truly. So does my country and government have what it takes to stand up to the rest of the government scene all across the world? The only way to find out is by watching the entirety of this video so you don't miss any crucial information. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe on the video. So for introductions, I feel like that I should talk about the description first and then go on to the location and population. So my country of origin is based off of the Reformation and how many broke off from the Catholic Church and just split to many areas of the world in search for religious freedom. Hence is why you see settlers come to North America and establish places like the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Hence is where I'm going to have my government at. Traditionally, you hear of stories of the colonization of Plymouth Colony and Massachusetts Bay Colony, and what I want to do is I wanted to sort of like re-envision it and just kind of play out a timeline where another colony was settled like nearby Plymouth called Duxbury, which is an actual colony, it just didn't have this type of government at all. And the population I estimated would be more or less similar to Plymouth Bay Colony, as they're having around like 1,000 people. My symbol for my country and government is just like a plain cross, or at least a fancy one with a circle in it, just because I feel like there isn't much that is needed to explain my country and government, as you'll see later on. I feel like that this encapsulates both the government and the country, like policy, ideals, etc. And as well, you'll see my motto, which says the path towards righteousness, also has like a lot to play with religion, solely because my country and government is heavily based on religion. So I feel like having like a religious tone to just about everything in this country government, it would fit fine. Now that we got introductions out of the way, I think I could finally establish the system of government that we're going to be using, which I think most of you know, and that is a theocracy. So theocracy differs from the standard systems of government that you see because there's not no like amount of branches in play, or it's not being ruled by the people or the majority. It is all ruled by one sole, well, I wouldn't say person since he is immortal, and that is the divine powers, or as so many call him God. The way this typically works is that a leader is to be chosen by God somehow, like he should convey the message of who the leader shall be for the community, and that leader shall be the sole communicator between God and himself, so that he can effectively lead the community as so God intended. Although we talked about religion pretty heavily in Article 1, there is possibly an even more amount in Article 2, as it establishes the main religion that is to be believed in the community. This religion that is to be believed in the community is Puritanism, or that I chose to be believed in, because it kind of falls in line with the Reformation and how Puritanism was established after they broke away from the Catholic Church. And so I feel like it would only fit best if Puritanism was the religion that is to be believed in here. So in regards with money in Article 3, I do think that a monetary system should be established. I don't really have a preference on whether or not it should or the benefits, but I just think overall it would just help the community in general with trades and services and goods inside the community and outside of it if they ever do business with other colonies or civilizations. I just think it'd be helpful overall. Another benefit / drawback to this monetary system is the way that the church shall incorporate it, which is, taxes pretty much. And these taxes are hidden behind these so-called optional tithes, which usually is the donation of money during church. Like on Sundays, they would donate money to help fund the church. But in our case, in our community, these might not be so optional. So I wouldn't really call them a tithe, but it just sounds much nicer if you call it a tithe rather than taxes. As far as social hierarchy goes in our community, it only really boils down to your affiliation with the church, such as the leader and the clergy getting, well, obviously the highest seat on the top of the pyramid compared to just the standard members of the church and the residents in the community, just solely because they're just more important to the church and to the success of it and etc. They serve a bigger purpose compared to just the members and the residences. On the aspect of education, it more or less comes down to Puritan belief. Since they believe that children are, by nature, sinful, because they don't know the differences between what actions are sinful and what are not. So they believe that to prevent this, they should have education and schooling be required for these children, so that they could teach them the right and wrong, or so the path towards righteousness, essentially, so that they could grow up to be efficient adults in our community, abiding by God. In regards to military in Article 6, I do think that our community should have a military or at least a militia be established, just because it adds that layer of protection for our community from who knows what. There could be conflict that leads to war or just an invasion from anyone really. And if we don't have a military to act upon these events, then well, that's it pretty much. So I think it's pretty necessary to have a military in most cases. Another use, especially for a military in our community, is the enforcement of our rules in our community. Because frankly, I don't believe that God himself is going to come down and tell everyone to abide by these rules. I think that responsibility is on the people, or more or less the leader, to make our community abide by these rules. Thus, I think that the militia could be used as a way to keep enforcement, such as they could act like the police, perhaps, just keeping everyone on the right path and to not be doing mischievous acts or just breaking the law in any sorts. So I guess they could sort of act in that way as well. Although you could have most likely guessed my source of inspiration just from the presentation alone, I think that giving my inspirations their slide of their own would be a good way to say thanks. My first inspiration, probably my most important one, is the Reformation and the colonization of the Plymouth colony, just because I used it as a basis and a blueprint for my entire government projects, such as the whereabouts of this government being in a colony nearby Plymouth, and the religion that is to be used here and to be studied, which is Puritanism, which did come from the Reformation. My second source of inspiration goes way back to ancient Chinese dynasties, which wasn't directly stated, but you can infer just from the sort of rules that just didn't seem quite Puritan-like, such as the way that leaders are chosen to be in the community, because they relied on messages from God in which they interpreted from just abnormal events, such as the aligning of planets or maybe even stars, perhaps. They took these kind of messages, which didn't really have a meaning. They interpreted that as God speaking to them, trying to lay down a message such as the next leader or so. Lastly, I think that definitely the US Constitution, or more or less just the US in general, has had an impact on me, because I took aspects of the Constitution and just sort of implemented them in inside my government, such like just modern aspects of it compared to stuff like the Chinese dynasty, such as a more modern monetary system that would be applied elsewhere, like just in other colonies or so, and etc. It gives that modern aspect towards my government rather than just make it similar to a dynasty, a Puritan dynasty perhaps. The last part of this presentation will go over the key ideas that I got from creating this government, as well as some pros and cons of it compared to other systems of government. One of the main key ideas of this government compared to other theocracies is the idea of like just kind of Frankenstein meshing traditions and practices from other more religious like theocracies, such as the ones from ancient dynasties that we looked over, from like the Shang dynasty, as well as practices from Puritanism from the more recent Reformation, and just combining all those to see what we got. And it actually ended up pretty well, actually. Okay, the second key idea revolves around, although Puritanism's, like in general, had more or less of a strict like guidelines when it came to following the Word of God and the ideals of God, they never really established more or less a theocracy over here in like the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And so I thought that the idea of a theocracy, while it didn't seem too far-fetched, it actually wasn't anything that happened more or less in Puritanism yet, which was interesting, to be honest. The third key idea, which also plugs into the pros and cons of this, is the simplicity in governing a theocracy compared to a democracy. Because in general, like when it comes to the majority of the planning, there really isn't much to plan other than just to listen to the Word of God. Once you do that, well, I guess you just gotta follow the rules then. This ties into the pros of this theocracy, or at least my system of theocracy, in that there are much less conflicts that arise in a system like this, mostly due to because there's less power in the people's hands, as it all lays in the hands of the leader as well as God himself. And it's not likely that people would try to refute God in any way that's not asking for a good thing. Yeah, although there are less like worries and hardships to deal with, since it's mostly God doing the work in a theocracy, or said to be doing the work. The cons of a theocracy are the limits that it brings with it, such as the lack of religious freedom in a theocracy, because frankly you're studying under one religion, you're looking under one God, or you're just listening to his one set of directions at all times. There is no other religion that shall be believed in this community at all. The last con to this system of theocracy more or less deals with the majority of systems of government, and that is the idea of corruption within them. And it doesn't really have to deal with God in any way, it more or less has to deal with the people, more or less the leader, because the leader still has a considerable amount of power over the people, because he is the one who interprets God's messages and communicates with God personally, and then conveys that information to the people. And as seen in the Shang dynasties, this wasn't always truthful and loyal, as the emperors would tend to just lie and abuse their power as leader to get whatever they want and to keep their power. And it was only by miracle that he was overthrown, the emperor was. And it really shows that really no system of government is without flaw. Although I didn't anticipate this video taking as long as it did, I still hope that nonetheless you all enjoyed watching it, and I hope you all learned as much information about theocracies and the system of as much as I did when I first went into it. And without further ado, thank you for letting me present, and I'll see you all hopefully on Thursday. Ciao.